Rick told me to say something positive while I'm up here, so I'm going to try my hardest, okay? It's been raining. Talk a little bit about challenges, I think, in the beef industry. I know any of y'all that have cattle know the last couple of years have been hard. If you're anybody that owns interest in a feed yard or somewhere, it's been really hard over the last couple of years. But I want to look back just a minute. All this stuff that's happened, you know, we start back in 1996. That's when our cow inventory started to decline. And normally, you know, we decline and we pick back up, and it's about a 10-year cycle. Well, we're into the 17th year of cow liquidation now. We'll talk about that. Of course, in 2000, we had the dot-com bubble burst that affected the beef market, set us back. Then we were followed by the World Trade Center attack that set the beef markets back. Then in 2002 and 3, we had BSE in Canada, and we founded the United States. That set us back even further, especially on our exports. You just go on down the list, especially the last 13 years have been really exciting. Our economist up at Amarillo likes to say, you know, in 2008, after we started moving into the renewable fuel standards era, he said, we'll have to go through a transition period for a while, and then all the markets will stabilize, and then everything will be back to normal. And I asked him last week, when are we going to finally stabilize? It seems like we've been in a transition for a long time. So there's a lot of up and down and a lot of risk that's been occurring lately. Let's talk about climate for a minute. It's nice that it's been raining. I was surprised. It looks like you could water ski in the medians between here and Plainview. Okay. It's nice for some. I wanted to put this up here though. We go back to August 28th of 2012. There's what the U.S. Drought Monitor looked like. Down at the bottom right-hand corner is what the Drought Monitor looked like, the most recent one that they released. Have things changed a whole lot? Well, about the main thing that's changed is main thing that's changed is the Midwest Corn Belt isn't having trouble. If you look down in our part of the world, overall, if anything, it's actually become worse east or west of us. And if any of y'all have had to go to Colorado or somewhere for vacation this summer and driven through New Mexico, it's tough out in that part of the world. They have been picking up some rain. But we are still, even though we're blessed with some rainfall here the last couple of months, especially last month, we still are in a situation that we're not out of this drought yet, from a, if you want a technical standpoint or whatever you want to call it. And if we look at, this would be the current NOAA soil moisture anomalies, meaning how far below normal are we on soil moisture, you can still see down in our area of the world that we're below normal where we need to be on soil moisture, even though we've been having good rain. This is an interesting chart I wanted to put up here. This is the Palmer Drought Index, one of the drought indexes that they'll calculate. And what, notice up here it says additional precipitation needed to bring the Palmer Drought Index back to -0.5. -0.5 is about normal. So this is the amount of rainfall in addition to what you would normally expect to occur. Not just how many more inches do we need to bring us back to normal, but how much above normal rainfall do you need? Once again, just illustrating that in our region, that we're still in an area that they indicate we need 3 to 6 inches above normal rainfall in order to try bringing the drought index back to normal. So again, we're not out of this yet. It's nice to have some relief. You know, relate this to pasture in a moment. And in fact, we're looking, they are calling for some improvement. You'll notice over the next 3 months, we're calling for some improvement. They're not moving us out of the drought, but potential to improve the situation that we're in, which is good as we move into wheat planting season. Also, as you're trying to finish off a crop, and also as we're trying to recover some of our pastures that have been hurt the last couple of years. Looking ahead on weather, this would be the outlook for El Nino or La Nina out in front of us. And basically what this is telling us is the probability of not having an El Nino or a La Nina is about 50 to 60% as we look out in front of us. So We're not going to be hurt by La Nina like we were a couple of years ago when the La Nina came in on top of the drought we were already suffering. We're not necessarily going to be helped by an El Nino that would bring in wetter conditions this winter. So hopefully we'll stay neutral. It'd be nice to develop an El Nino, and some of the weather models would indicate that late next spring we may actually move into El Nino conditions, which would mean we may have some wetter conditions in front of us next spring and summer. These are the two I wanted to pick up on here. Has anybody ever heard of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation or the Pacific decadal Pacific decadal oscillation? You've heard of them? Are they good or bad?
I don't know. I'm waiting.
Okay. You know, we hear about El Nino and La Nina and all these other things. Our climate is affected by big, long-term, what I'll call macro climate factors. And then things like El Nino and La Nina are little modifiers that come in. So we've got these big characters playing in the background. We have things like El Nino and La Nina come in behind and modify things. And what's a little bit disconcerting, and if you don't want to hear something potentially negative, go to the restroom, okay, is we are stuck in a climate pattern right now that is not good in terms of our outlook for completely avoiding dry conditions over the next several years. And I bring that up because as we talk about trying to recover a rangeland and pasture or rebuild a cow herd or plan for irrigation in the future or things along those lines, we need to be aware that we're in some long-term climate patterns that mean we're going to be drier than normal on average over a long period of time. Now, it's not saying, and I want to make sure everybody hears this, I'm not standing here saying that we're going to have drought continuous. What I'm saying is the probability of having drier weather over the long haul on average with the situation we're in is higher. And two of the big factors are what are called the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, or the AMO, is what you're called, and the other one's Pacific decadal oscillation, which is called a PDO. And that's just what is the temperature of the Atlantic Ocean and what's the temperature of the Northern Pacific Ocean. And so this is what the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation looks like. This is up through April 2013. So you can see if we start back, let's pick up right here, the Atlantic's cool, it heats up, it cools down, and it heats up. The Atlantic Ocean started heating up in 1996. What was going on in the rolling plains of Texas and further on down in Texas in 1996 and 97? Anybody? Something called DROUGHT. Okay? Bad drought in part of those areas. Let's go back and look at the 1950s. What was the Atlantic Ocean doing in the 1950s during the drought of the 50s? It was hot. Okay? When the Atlantic Ocean heats up, it changes wind currents and all this other stuff that I don't quite understand. But instead of letting a lot of moisture and so forth come up through the Gulf and push up through the central United States, it either blows it west along the equator down across Mexico, or it pushes it up the eastern seaboard. Now, what's been going on in the eastern seaboard over the last several years? Record snowfall, record rainfall, hurricanes hit New York City, all this other kind of stuff. And this year, how many hurricanes have come into the Gulf and moved up into the central part of the country? 0. One came in and hooked and went across the panhandle of Florida and back out in the Atlantic Ocean. A couple of other small ones have gone across Mexico. Again, when the Atlantic heats up, it just kind of starves us for moisture in the central part of the U.S. So that's where it comes into being a big player. The other one's the Pacific. And again, a lot of times we think of El Nino and La Nina because those are out in the Pacific, but that's along the equator in the Pacific. This is further north of the Pacific Ocean. And again, it goes through a cycle where it heats up and it cools down, and it heats up and it cools down. The Pacific Ocean began cooling down in 2006. That was rainfall been since 2006. Been absent for the last couple of years and spotty before that. And when these two start playing with each other or interacting with each other, it affects us. When the Pacific cools down, it impedes the ability of the atmosphere to pick moisture up out of the Pacific Ocean and blow it in from the west. So when the Pacific's cool, we can't blow moisture in from the west. When the Atlantic's hot, we can't bring moisture up from the Gulf. So what happens to the central part of the United States? We're dry, on average, a little dry. And what's a little bit frustrating is you can see here on this cyclical pattern, if we start back in 1945 and go through a complete cycle at 1945 to 2005, it takes about 60 years for the Pacific to do that. You go back to the Atlantic, it takes about 50 or 70 years for a complete cycle. Again, the Atlantic began heating up in 1996 and the Pacific cooled down in 2006. So we're kind of on the front end of, again, these big patterns that set up for an average of drier conditions, and then there's things like El Niños and La Niñas that come in and modify it a little bit. And I tried laying these on top of each other year to year, but what I wanted to look at here, let's go back to the 1950s and look at the 1950s. Hot Atlantic, cold Pacific in there. Go back to the 1930s, we had a hot Atlantic and a hot Pacific. I'll show you some of it in just a moment. But again, not trying to make anybody go home and drink, okay? But in terms of strategic planning, you might want to know that, and again, we're not going to be in drought every year, but the probability of being drier than normal is higher than if we had a different set of ocean temperatures. Just to give you the combinations here, this is the one we're sitting in right now. So this would be different phases of the PDO and AMO and how they impact drought potential. This is the situation we're in right now. Cool Pacific, warm Atlantic, you can see where Texas sits, into Mexico and Colorado in those conditions. You know, the manna from heaven from a rainfall standpoint would be up here. Cool Pacific, or hot Pacific and cool Atlantic. That's where we were in the 1960s, 70s. We had some droughts, or dry periods in the 60s and 70s, but by and large, we were wetter than normal through a lot of that period of time under those conditions. So, again, it's nice to have rainfall. Hopefully we're going to correct this for a while, but I think in our long-term planning, when we start talking about, did I buy more cows or what do I do, it's keep in mind that we're in conditions that the probability of having drier conditions are higher than they would be under different set of circumstances. So, move on from there. Back to grass. I think you all may have seen some data on grass today. I'm sorry I wasn't here to look at it myself, but how rapidly can we recover some of these pastures? And again, no-brainer. I work for Texas A&M, timing and amount of rain. Okay, easy answer. I'm sure you can all answer that question. But also grazing management and forage utilization. And what's occurred, if we think this is a process initiated or intensified by drought, you know, normally what's occurring is this. We have increased soil moisture, increased infiltration, more protected cover, more herbage production, more root growth, more vigor, more energy capture. 2 years ago, those circles ground to a halt in reverse directions. So where we went into less soil moisture, less herbage production, less cover, less infiltration, low energy capture, low vigor, less root growth. And the key to recovery is how quickly can you reverse those processes and turn those wheels back the other direction. And I think a key here is the word right here. We can't control moisture, we can't control infiltration, we can control how much cover we let develop on those areas and try to maintain so that we can increase infiltration and try to build up soil moisture on those areas. Just to go through some historic data on other droughts, this would be from southwestern Colorado back in the 30s, going through the drought of the 30s and coming out. And this would be ground cover, percent of cover that was present, and the dashed line would be ungrazed areas, the other ones are moderately grazed, and the others are heavily grazed. The point being, look back here in the early 30s, 80 to 85% ground cover from the grasses, moved into the drought, dropped it down to almost nothing on some of those areas on ground cover. But as it moved out of the drought in the 30s and into the 40s, look how rapidly that cover came back. we can recover quite rapidly, given the right rainfall and the right management. The other one, if you're feeling bad, because I've had guys call me and say, I've got areas that I manage properly according to the book, is look at the ungrazed areas. 85% covered down to about 25. Even those ungrazed areas suffer the drought. And I've seen areas up around here that haven't been grazed in 4 or 5 years, they look worse than stuff that's been grazed. So nobody is safe. Look over in the western Kansas back in the 50s. It's northwest, west central, southwest, or central Kansas. Percentage of cover that was lost during the drought. 60% loss of cover. The minimum was about 40% loss of cover. But those come back quickly. In Kansas, the major grasses, buffalo grass. If you've got areas that were turfy before this with buffalo grass, they're probably the worst looking areas that you got right now. Buffalo grass does not weather drought well because it has a root system about this deep. The grasses with deeper roots weather the problem better. You'll notice blue grama, it was running about almost 20% cover at the front of the drought. It dropped down to about 10, but it came back really quick. Buffalo grass started at 45, dropped down to about 10. Never recovered more than about 15%. This will be on sandy area up in Oklahoma through the drought of the 50s. Once again, you can see blue grama, one of the main grasses up there, going into the drought of the 50s, increased, dropped down on cover, and as it moved out, picked back up. An interesting one here is notice that little blue stem, one of the taller, deeper rooted grasses available in the nose nickel system, increased in the early 50s, and when the drought hit, it dropped and it never returned. It never came back to its previous levels. What you'll see if you have sandy country with sand drop seed on it, is sand drop seed is not hurt very much by drought. And I was just out in New Mexico over the weekend looking at a bunch of stuff, and that's what's coming back. It's high proportion of sand drop seed, which that's fine. Sand drop seed is a grass cattle will consume, and it's good to have some cover developing on those areas. As you've probably already seen, expect a good flush of weeds, or maybe I need to use range terms, forbs, when the rains start, okay? You can see here, this starts in 1956. This would be forb production up in western Kansas. Look what happened to forb production. Whether it's on heavy utilized areas or moderate, forb production took off. This is Mother Nature's way of holding the ground down. Yes, they may be robbing some moisture from the grass you're trying to reestablish, but they're providing cover, cooling the ground down, keeping the dirt, the soil from blowing away. We look at ragweed cover out in the sandy areas of Oklahoma, again, 1955, big spike as it moved out of the drought. Those areas. Another one I want you to look at is look down here, at least on the ragweed down here in Oklahoma. This is lightly grazed, moderately grazed, and heavily grazed. Why isn't there any ragweed on those heavily grazed areas? I thought heavy grazing caused weed problems. Well, heavy grazing does increase the amount of forbs you produce, but cattle will eat those forbs. Okay, that's why there's not a lot of forbs on those heavily grazed areas. You look up here in Kansas, there were forbs, but not nearly the extent that there were on those moderately grazed areas. So even though you have those broadleaf plants out there, they are of value. They are protecting the soil, and they are providing some feed for whatever's grazing out there. So wrap on that, cover and production of some grasses is going to decline more than others. Down in our area, buffalo grass will probably be the one that takes the biggest hit on your range area. Expect the forb or weed flush as drought breaks. It's already occurred down here. And the total production can recover quickly. When I say quickly, I mean it can recover in years, not decades, okay, if it's managed properly. Feed and commodities, Tim went over some of this. Outlook for the 2013-14 corn crop's good as long as we don't have an early freeze. They decided it got low enough. They had been pushing it up the last couple of days on prices. It's gonna give us some relief on the commodity and grain markets, or the feed markets tied to grain. Again, our hay supplies are increasing. I don't know how much hay grazers planted around here. We'll go south, west of Lubbock and over to New Mexico, and there's hay grazer planted in people's front yards, I think, over there. Okay, there's gonna be quite a bit of hay around here, and there's a lot of wheat hay harvested back in the spring because of the freezing. So that's gonna help us on our refuge markets. Protein markets, I don't know what's fixing to happen. Soybeans ought to be in decent shape. The other one down here is gonna be how good the cotton crop turns out down in this area. Corn supply going up, as long as we don't freeze, that's gonna help us on the corn price. You can see what Wisely was projecting on the report earlier this week. The average corn price for next week on the farm across the U.S. somewhere around $4.75. Some guys have been talking down in this area. I don't think we'll ever get that low. So for some relief on corn price, corn ending stocks, this is a big one looking way out in front of us, so we're going to have enough carryover next year. And that's, at least the reports last week picked that up some. Looking positive on that. And you can see as a response, we've been knocking the corn price down. Took a big drop last week. The report, I guess, in the last couple of days changed that, and now that it's back up again on corn. So it's looking better. I guess the question Rick asked me was, are better outlooks for crop production beneficial to the beef industry? Okay. Well, it should mean lower inputs for cow-calf stocker, backgrounders, and cattle feeders. We've got lower grain, and that affects a lot of the other commodities that we use other than corn. It should support calf and feeder pricing. If you hadn't looked at the calf market in the last week or two, part of that's due to rain. Everybody's expecting to plant wheat. Part of it's due to the corn market going down. We pushed calf prices and feeder prices back up again. So that should be beneficial to somebody. Who benefits more from lower grain and protein meal markets? Beef, pork, or poultry? How much of that hay grazer can we feed the pigs and chickens? Not much. The two of our competing meats are the ones that are going to benefit more than the beef industry from the better corn prices and the better protein prices. The swine and the poultry industry will. And I bring that up because one of the big challenges we have in the beef industry right now is we can't push beef prices high enough to really have a sustainable production system from the cow-calf all the way through to retail. And the higher we, let me put it this way, the more we reduce the cost of production for a competition, the less likely we're going to be able to push those beef markets up more. So again, will low grain prices really be of a great net benefit to the beef industry? We'll wait and see. It'll give us some relief, but I don't know how big of a net benefit it will be. And I'm not a proponent of high grain prices, but that's the situation. And part of the reason that may be the case is you all know this, our cow inventory continues to decline. We got the lowest number of cows in the United States since the 1950s. And either Friday or a couple of weeks from now, I can't remember the date, we'll get our July 1st inventory report. And we're going to have less cows on July 1st than we did have on January 1st. We keep declining. Part of that decline is due to the drought. Part of it is people are selling out of business and not getting back in. There's other alternative uses for land. And if we continue to knock our cow herd down. And a lot of folks think that's good, and it has been good because the fewer cows we have, the fewer calves we have, that makes the supply of calves lower, and that should push prices higher. We have a ceiling up here of how much will consumers pay for beef. And just because the cow inventory is the lowest been since 1950 does not influence somebody's decision to buy a steak at the supermarket. They're going to hit a price level that they can't afford to spend. And how do you maintain prices if you don't have the demand that you need? You keep cutting supply. Can anybody spell sheep industry? That's what happened to the sheep industry years ago. They lost demand, they kept cutting their numbers down, cutting numbers to support price. And they ended up with an industry that's where it is today. We don't want to get into that situation in the beef industry. Calf crops dropping. This is a big issue. This is what really has hurt cattle feeders in the last couple of years. They were not only dealing with record high corn prices, but they were dealing with a low calf crop, a low inventory of calves, so everybody was chasing those calves and bid them up very high. And the combination of those two is not pretty. Our cattle on feed numbers, again, are dropping. Here's the 5-year average. Here was last year. Here's the first 3 months of this year. If you go on out here and look, it's continued to drop off. So all that should be signaling that we have lower beef supplies in front of us. The big question is, can we afford to move those beef supplies? What we have done, even though we've got declining cattle numbers, is we've kept our beef tonnage up. One way we kept beef tonnage up is we made the cattle way more coming out of the feed yards. You can see here, just look at 2012, the purple, versus the first 6 months of 2013 in the red. We have pushed our weights up out of the feed yards, and that's how we maintain beef production in the U.S. numbers we have. But we're about at the end of the silver bullets that we have available to us to push weights heavier on cattle. And so we will start to see some of our production decline. And again, like I said, we've maintained beef production despite falling numbers. You see it right here. So we've got contracting numbers, contracting beef supply, higher calf and feeder prices. Will that mean higher beef prices? That's a big question. Can we push that to higher beef prices? Will the consumers, both the domestic and export consumers, step up and pay higher prices for beef because of the lower supply? The people that are hurting the most are up on the top end of the industry. The packers have been losing money, but you can see what the cattle feeders, this is Nebraska, Texas, looks about the same. Combination of high feed prices and high cattle or high feeder prices, high inputs. There's got to be some relief in this. What we're going to face before long, you've already seen some of the infrastructure changes occur. Packing plant closed down in Plainview. We've got a couple of feed yards at least in the Panhandle that have closed down. Most of the feed yards are not running at capacity. The way we're idling in space is just cut the employees, cut the amount of people working at the feed yard down and run the feed yard at some lower capacity. The way to idle it because of the low feeder cattle supply. Here's what I want to show you real quick before we move on with the consumers. These are box beef prices, and we'll just look at choice up here. We've got a ceiling. We pushed through that ceiling once. But if you look, starting back here in January of 2012, choice box beef hit $2 and dropped. It hit close to $2 and dropped. It hit close to $2 and dropped. We couldn't push through $2. March, we tried $2 and couldn't do it. Finally in May, they pushed it to $2.10, but we backed way off again. In order to support $1.35, $1.37 fed cattle prices that may be necessary for the people, for you all to get $2 a pound for your 500-pound calves, and a stock producer to get $1.65 for the feeder cattle. We're going to have to get beef up to a higher price. Otherwise, we're going to have to adjust all the prices down in the rest of the system in order to make the system work. And again, this is a big question for the consumers. You can see what's happening with fresh beef demand. We're still at a level we were back in 1997 on demand for fresh beef. And this demand is what will they pay in terms of price for the supply. You can see what's happened with poultry consumption since 1980. It's going up and up and up. And what's the trend on beef consumption? Down and down and down. Part of it out here, we've had this big slide off that starts in about 2007 or 8 when we had the recession. And we've been cutting supply since that time. So again, the question is, one of the big challenges for the beef industry is we've got to figure out how to either increase the production or stabilize prices at the consumer level so that everybody can stay in business. So So again, the big question, can the domestic and export consumers step up and pay higher prices? We're gonna test it next spring and see. Okay. So, one other thing, and I'm gonna get on the soapbox just a minute. I think one of the problems we have in the beef industry, and anybody that raises cattle